Hi and welcome to Out the Box Talk, and we have people who live life out of the box. And who do we have today? We have Andrea Edwards, the digital conversationalist. She's been an Australian, more so. Why? Because I said she's born as an Australian, but then she's been a global person, living in different parts of the globe, working and impacting lives in a different way. But I'm not going to be talking much and talking who she is and what she's been doing, but we'll have Andrea talk about it more.
I'm great, Darls, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. So Andrea, I know you've done a lot of transition in your life from where you've been to what you're doing today. I would want to understand more from the basics. You could kind of give us a little idea on your early childhood days, how it started and what you were doing and how life was for you in terms of thinking something out of the box.
I'm a country girl from Australia, so I grew up 300 kilometres north of Melbourne. And if people have been to Australia, they might know Albury-Wodonga. And it was a lovely childhood, you know. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. Beautiful community, but the big part of my family was music. We played in a local brass band, but also sports like cycling. So I used to ride off into the country after school every day, or bodybuilding as a teenager, which made me a scary woman for the boys. I kind of look back on my childhood as happy, free. You know, we were the latchkey kids, right? That generation. So no one was really paying attention to what we were doing, and we just got on with things. We obviously didn't have what the kids have today. And then from there, I went to Monash University, where I studied music and archaeology, ancient history. Which was always a huge passion. And yeah, so then the first thing I did out of uni was I was offered a job as a musician in the Australian Army, and I thought, all right, I had no real plans about what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a journalist, but I wasn't a very good writer. So that's something I've worked out a lot. So I took the job in the Army, which was an interesting journey, an experience. You certainly learn a lot about people and different types of people. I think it made me a much more empathetic person towards all types. And then, yeah, from there it was moving into communications, public relations. So after the Army, I got a job running communications for an aerospace company, which was an incredible opportunity for a 23-year-old. And then from there, it was just taking the paths as they opened up to me, you know, and a huge part of it was travel. So I went through Egypt, Jordan and Israel in 92. That was my first trip. 95 through Nepal, India, China, a bit of Thailand, but my love affair with India began back then. And then you landed in London, loved that, landed in Boston, did a bit of time in New York before 9/11, then travelled again through Central America, back to Australia, then to Singapore, then to Phuket, then back to Australia, I think it was, and then back to Singapore, and now back in Phuket. So it's kind of a journey where, I don't know, the opportunities come up, I think might as well take them. There's not many things you can guarantee in life, so I control what I can control and let the rest of it just sort of happen, and usually take the riskier path, because that's where the life happens. That's what I've found anyway.
Wow. That, I think, a life or a start that a lot of people would envy around and figure out like, hey, I wish I had a start like that. But then I want to ask more from a perspective of from a parenting style. You know, was it more like were you guys ever conditioned to think like you got to be like everyone? You know, this is our family standards, or this is like our culture, or was it in, say, at school or at work or at university, where anywhere you felt there was a need or there was a conditioning that was constantly happening which you had to rebel out?
It's such an interesting question, especially when we live in Asia, where there is a lot of expectations that are put on people about the sort of jobs you should have, the sort of income, the status, all that sort of stuff. And while in Australia that certainly happens too, within our family it was just none of it. There was no pressure, there was no expectations. You know, the family sort of all moved into the local brass band, and my sister and I really embraced music, a lot of passion, and we worked really hard at it, but nobody ever forced us to. In fact, anytime anyone tried to force us to do anything, we didn't stick with it. So our path, or my path, was definitely one that was one I followed, and I wasn't praised or supported or anything. It was just, just follow, there was no, I wasn't living up to somebody else's expectation, which I think is probably important for me. And I don't live up to other people's expectations. I'm just trying to do the best I can do and following what makes sense to me is the next step. But definitely there was no expectations, no, if I turned out to be a plumber, my family would be happy for me. If they were happy for me to join the army, they would have been happy if I was a chef. There was none of that. It was just, just do what you want. And I suppose it's because neither of my parents had that sort of expectation on them either. Even though, my dad was a successful artist in Australia, and my mum was a nurse all her life, and she always worked really hard, but there was a core work ethic naturally within us. There's also a service aspect within all of us naturally. So I suppose it's maybe we inherited more these genetic qualities rather than having things forced on us. The idea that you lead by example is something that I think is incredibly true. I can't force my children to be polite if they don't see me being polite. So, no, I didn't have any expectations. I didn't even have expectations of myself growing up, other than I was going to be the Victorian Police Commissioner, but obviously I didn't do that.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's an interesting information. So, what I want to understand from this is, on one end, you were fortunate enough to have that freedom while you're growing up, which is very critical, I would say, in terms of creativity and passion to flourish, and which is very evident from how you were, what you are today, and how you've been groomed up. But I also want to understand where you on the other side of things, where in today's culture, where the millennials are, where they are kind of being given everything, where it's more like, hey, hey, you're special, you got to get everything, okay, you want this, you want an ice cream, you get it, you want this, you get it. Where you on the other side of things, where you're more fortunate enough to get what you really want.
This conversation has been going on for a long time, and my children are spoiled. Of course they're spoiled. They're very privileged children. They go to an amazing school. They have all the technology they need, and we do praise them and tell them they're fantastic and tell them they're great. And you hear a lot of pushback from people, especially older generations, that we're spoiling children too much. And spoiling, there's a lot of examples of, cultural spoiling, boys in particular, treating them like kings from a young age, which I don't think does the boys any favours as far as who they grow into. But I don't know, I think we have an opportunity to parent our children in a really, really different way. And while they can be fortunate, the other side that I always make sure that my boys see is people who are not. So I'll take them to the worst places on earth for human life, and because I want them to see it. I want them to know that they're very, very lucky, so that they also become compassionate and want to take action. So, recently I've been involved in this community in Phuket called One Phuket, and we're all out there raising money to feed thousands and thousands of people who've been impacted by the economic fallout of the pandemic, right? And I've got my kids right in the heart of that. They need to see that, they also need to understand that, you don't look upon those people with pity, because they don't deserve pity. They deserve respect. They deserve dignity, because it's not their fault that we're sitting in this situation as a global society. So we've got to do the right thing to take care of our fellow human beings. So I think, sometimes we judge every generation, we always have, right? But, I think we've got to be more understanding of how the younger Generation Z, live in the world, how they interact in the world. My kids are in quarantine at the moment, like so many other parts of the world. And we want to control time on with technology, but for one of my sons who loves his gaming, that's how he keeps connected with his friends. So I don't want to take that away from him. I want him to, use that time to be connected with his friends, because even when they catch up in person, they'll all sit around a table with their phone playing games on their phone while they're physically with each other. So I think we've got to do better at understanding our children's lives and not judging every aspect of it just because it's different to what we had. This digital generation is, it's almost inconceivable how every single aspect of your life is linked to the digital world, but that's what they've been born into. So we need to help them flourish within that world, but also help them to see that they've got to be part of a bigger world. And then the other thing is, if they are a fortunate child, if they've been raised in wealth, that we also raise them to understand that there's other people who don't have what they have, and that's not their fault. And to be sympathetic, empathetic, but more importantly, to be compassionate and to be involved in creating change so that we can get rid of this incredible imbalance in the world. And it's getting worse. The imbalance is getting worse, and it's in every country in the world. And so, I don't know, let's be a little bit more open-minded and hopeful for our children, that they're capable of making the right decisions rather than judging them because we don't actually understand their life. We can't, because we didn't grow up with it. Does that make sense?
Oh yes, very much. And in fact, you got me to the point which I was wanting to ask you as well, because it's so important, because I feel I so resonate with the whole thought, because I feel you've had certain privileges does not allow you to look at the other side with pity, but rather, look at them and it's not their fault. How can you define that respect and, take care of the fellow human? And it's that grooming that can kind of build better societies, because I feel globally there are lots of problems and the inequality is growing more and more is because at the grooming stage, this did not happen. I feel a lot of parenting had happened in terms of saying, hey, you know what, we are privileged, we are different, so we don't mingle with them, so they're gonna take away, and that kind of a culture which has been created. And it's just not to Asia, Europe, or the US, or any part. I think globally that's been a mindset, and which is probably very critical for us to do. So you said in terms of how critical or how important our roles are in terms of impacting our next generation in terms of telling. How much of active involvement do you think in terms of beyond our family, in terms of society? I'm saying, how much is it in our hands versus what you see from around that is going to make an impact?
We've got an amazing opportunity right now to all be involved in creating the future that we want to see for all of humanity. I say one of the things that we need to do is redesign a world with dignity at the centre for all life on Earth, and that's the natural world as well as the human society. I think for such a long time we've allowed these layers to exist where when I buy a dress at not a supermarket, at a department store, I don't buy dresses at supermarkets. When I buy a dress at a department store, did someone suffer to create that dress? Did the environment suffer to create that dress? Same with our furniture, fast furniture, our use of technology. We have to start taking responsibility and stop turning a blind eye to the suffering that exists in the creation of the stuff, cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and more and more and more, which is half the problem we're dealing with in the world right now, right? We're consuming, but we're not taking responsibility, and I think every single one of us has got an opportunity to stand up and say, we're not going to accept that anymore. And the role now is for all of us to really envision, what is this future that we want to create? Because if you can envision it and you can help other people see a better future, a brighter future, a fairer future, then we've got a chance of creating it. So one of the things that I find at the moment is people are reacting to the negativity. They're fighting against this growth in commentary, which is really kind of ugly and divisive, right? And quite rightly, like I can't stand that sort of rhetoric either, right? But what we've got to try and do, what's happening is, because we're spending so much of our energy fighting against what we don't like, what we're seeing is that we're actually moving towards what we don't like, because we're getting more angry and more negative, because that negativity is sort of brewing in us too, right? So rather than moving towards that, we need to stay where we are, stay centered, and start really sort of saying, right, come on, this is what we can do, this is what we can change, these are the innovations we need to make, this is the future we can create. And then we recruit people with us, and then we empower them to go out there and have the confidence to own their voice, because so many people The majority of people on this planet are awesome, you know. It's a small percentage that are negative and divisive, and we're spending too much time focused on them. We're also spending too much time designing a world around them when we should look at the mass of us, the goodness that sits in the middle, and we should create a world around us. We're always catering to that negative side, and you know, you see it, you know, violence towards women is on the increase. But are we going to create a world around guys who are violent towards women? Are we going to recognize that the vast majority of men are not like that? So let's create a world there. You know, I see a lot of men, especially Caucasian men, they feel like they're losing their place and their voice in the world, and I understand why they feel that, but it's a really unhealthy place to be, because when men feel excluded, well, they're gonna potentially become angry and become bitter, and then we're not going to achieve anything. We're just moving further apart. So we need to bring everyone together, and the best way to do that is to focus on all of the great people in the world, come together and say, what do we want? How do we want to rebuild this world? Because we have an opportunity to do that right now. And then let's get on with that. Let's get on with focusing there, because we've got a once in a lifetime opportunity to do something amazing. And I won't rest until we get there, and I'll never give up either.
Wow, I think that's beautifully put again. And I think this is very close to the kind of debate that we were having a few days back in terms of the kind of narratives that are being set by the media out today. You know, it's like nothing personal, but then politics, media, all are setting narratives out there, which is kind of building more on the bitterness between people, you know, bitterness between politicians, bitterness between economics, bitterness between industries. And what is happening is you are only fed with information of bitterness. And that is probably being sold very beautifully to the world by saying, hey, you know what, this is what sells, and more of bitter news is made out there. But at the same time, you put it very beautifully by saying, you know what, there are people, you know, there are wonderful people around and who are kind of saying, you know what, I'm cut off from this. I have my own mind and I can think and I can do this on my own, and I don't have to be affected by all that's going around. But where do you see this, you know, going forward? You know, where I see that percentage of people who can have a stable mind, who can make the differentiation of understanding what is being plugged, what is real, or maybe the truth is somewhere not on that end or this end, but somewhere in between. Having that understanding and having a sane mind to go forward. What do you see, or where do you think these people would be found, or what should be the step that they should be taking?
I think the first and most important thing is to always be paying attention to all sides of information, right? So if you're only listening to one media channel or one broadcast channel, or if you're sitting in an opinion on something and you're really strong and you're stuck in that opinion, that's not a good place to be. You know, I was having an argument with my brother about history. He quoted something to me and I said to him, where does that come from? And he has this incredible memory, and it was from when he was 15 at school. And I said, you do understand that history always changes, right? And he was kind of like shocked, right? Well, history can't change because history's in the past, so therefore also history is constantly changing. You know, there's new information, new finds. You know, we define an era where it was patriarchy, and then they find a female queen buried with all sorts of accoutrements, right? And you're like, wow, that completely changes that entire history and our understanding of it. And also, history is it's the victor, right? So you know, so much, you know, coming from Australia, right? How we define our history is we're the good guys, right? But that doesn't acknowledge the bad things that my ancestors did, but also what was lost when they did it. You know, what was lost in Aboriginal culture, what wisdom was lost, right? So the idea of the victor. So any country, wherever you live in the world, if you are looking at your history, if you look at it through the eyes of also what was lost, I think that's a really interesting process to go through, because we have lost so much wisdom, you know, and it's thousands of years back, right? And then you look at the people that were defeated are often the peaceful people, the wise people, the gentle people, and they'd gotten their societies to a point where they didn't want to dominate anymore, right? And war wasn't necessarily something that they wanted to do anymore. So it didn't mean that they were weak, it meant that they were evolved. But of course, we have then the war tribes, which we still have today. They're always the victors because they're the most powerful, but is that a way to measure our society? So the first thing we've got to do is know your history. Like, people don't know history. It's not an important topic for people anymore. History is a really important thing to understand. Always look at different points of view. There's so many different points of view, and you can be really uncomfortable reading a point of view, but it's important to know. With social media, monitor the conversations around the topics that you care about, even the people that you don't agree with. Look at what they say, listen to the words that they use. People who are against you are as convinced of their position as you are of yours. So I see all these people ripping each other apart, but that's not going to achieve anything. It's completely useless, right? So you've got to stand back from the conversation and try and really take the emotion out of it and try and understand all of the different points of view. And if you can do that, you can start to get a much more balanced view of the world, but also maybe change your own opinions, or taking new ideas that build your ideas up into bigger ideas. But always be open, always be curious, always try and put yourself in the shoes of the other people and understand why they come at things, why they come at those things, because everyone's got a reason for why they believe what they believe, right? So yeah, I mean, it's critical thinking, and you see countries like the Scandinavian countries, they bring it into their education system. They're teaching children critical thinking, and I think that's such a huge thing that we need to have in education systems all over the world. But pay attention to the brainwashing that goes on in your society, because every society has a brainwashing element. If there is somebody in your community being scapegoated by the government, that's something to be paying attention to, because usually the people who are being scapegoated are not the enemy. And that, I think that's another thing. And obviously in India, you've had a fair bit of the scapegoating going on in the last few years. We've recently experienced being scapegoats with the COVID situation. There was an attack on a lady in Singapore for being Indian because of the Indian variant. Justification for racism, no. So yeah, just always stay open-minded. But I think the best thing I ever learned from a really young age is always look around information, understand the motivation behind information, especially from governments, business, the media. And the media is a really interesting thing. Journalists are not bad people. It's the publishers who own them that we need to be challenging, because if they've got political affiliations and they're driving an agenda, then we should be paying attention to that. Rupert Murdoch is the classic, right? That man, for me, has done more damage than anyone to democracy in the last 50 years. And I'm looking forward to the day that his rule is over. He's far too powerful for the world that we need to be creating next, and he's against what we need to create next. He's peddling conspiracy theories, his attitude to the climate crisis, like everything. I see him as a danger to humanity at the moment, and I hope Kevin Rudd succeeds in his campaign to get a media inquiry into him in Australia. So let's see.
Interesting.
I go around in too many circles then?
No. We'll figure where that circle is going around, because I also resonate with the fact that these narratives in terms of the whole sense of history, like our upbringing, like I also relate to that, because like we were fed with a certain amount of history through our schooling days. And then I remember being fortunate enough to do some documentaries on the country, where I was kind of traveling the length and breadth of the country. And when you travel, you see the history is very, very different from what you've read in the books. So I'm like, where is this? This never figured out, or this was not told to us in the same narrative. And then you start having a lot of conflicting patterns in your head, where you start thinking like, hey, is that the history what they portrayed, or is this the true history? But then you see physical remains and the stories out there. So then you actually come down to the conclusion, the history books are again written by people, probably with certain bias and certain thoughts as to how. But then I feel these could be extremely damaging when especially at a schooling level, you're fed like this is the history of the country and this is what it is, and probably the true narrative is something very different. But yes, that's where the world is going in terms from a serious aspect. But you mentioned about the Scandinavian countries, and from there I would want to ask, I see the Scandinavian countries put a lot more of importance in terms of skill, in terms of how they learn things. And do you think play is a very important aspect of the child's growing, or why child, even in our lives as we grow and do things very creatively? Do you think having a sense of play, fun, kind of an attribute ingrained in us, very critical for us to be creative to make a difference?
I'm a real contradiction, because I'm an incredibly serious person, but at the same time I'm very, very light-hearted, right? As you know, we've played, right? There is nothing more important than play, being stupid, making a fool of yourself, laughing at yourself. And that wasn't always something I was capable of doing, laughing at myself, but just those real moments where you laugh out loud. You do something that you're just not good at, but you don't care. Make a fool of yourself, Without play, I don't know, the ability to laugh at yourself is something that I think is really important. When I was a young teenager, I wasn't very good at it. And then one day I realised I was taking myself far too seriously. So I'm always the first person to laugh at myself. If I fall over or make a fool of myself, I roll around the ground laughing, because it's funny. It's really funny when you make a fool of yourself. But I think it's really important to remember how to walk through the world with lighter feet. It's all gotten very deep and dark and heavy, and I've got my next book, Uncommon Courage, coming out soon, and that's what it's really about. It's trying to help people remember how to be light. It's not about happiness, it's about lightness. And to be light, you've got to sort of move a little bit more into your heart energy and sort of sit there more often, and it makes you more forgiving. It makes you more, it's just gentle. You're not so harsh. You're not judging when you sit in your heart energy. And I think, just the ability to achieve some level of contentment in your life. And, this last, 18 months almost now, I watch people, they're still running at speed. They're still like, people who have still got jobs working for companies, they're really stressed because they might lose their job. So they're working all hours of the day and night. And then there's people who've lost jobs, and they're stressed because they don't know if they're even going to be able to get another one, and how can they possibly survive. And it's a really, really, really stressful time for a lot of people. But if we can bring some lightness back in to our lives, I think it can't do anything but make life better. And of course, some people aren't going to be able to do that. There's a lot of people who are deeply grieving at the moment. There's people who are losing family members as we speak. People have lost their entire business, they've lost their house, they've lost everything. You are in a position where you can step into a lighter place. I think that is the place from where you can really become creative, because the other thing is the story of this time will always be about the innovation that happened in this time, but it also will be about the people who really contributed service to their community at this time. So I think they're the two areas. If you're struggling to find purpose right now and you haven't got a job and you're not desperate, like you've got no food to eat, but the government's taking care of you, go out there and serve your community. Because if you can help other people who are suffering even more than you can rise up and just bring a smile to their faces, right? And then the other side is go get working on that thing that you've been meaning to work on this whole time, but you didn't. So in the first lockdown, there were things I didn't do, and I regretted it. And then the second lockdown was too quick. But this lockdown that we're in at the moment, I went, right, I'm not going to miss this, because I know that this is possibly the last lockdown we're going to face. So get out there and get involved and do the things that I wanted to do. But also lighter. I wasn't fearful this time. The first round, I don't know if you remember when all this first broke out, there was so much fear. None of us knew what was coming, So this time last year, there was still a lot of fear. Now, there is still fear, but we're a little bit more resigned. We know what's coming. We know how bad it is. We know what we need to do to protect ourselves. But the fear is a little bit less than it was at the beginning. And I'm sure in India there's still a lot of areas where the fear is very prevalent right now. But just be lighter if you can. Play, be silly, laugh with your spouse, laugh with your children. Don't take stuff too seriously, because it's all been a bit too seriously lately, don't you think?
I completely agree. And when you talk back in the family also, it's so much of stress for everyone. What the kind of fear that little things in the family also causes fear. A packet comes, a delivery comes, and then hey, the helping guy brought it without sanitizing. What do you do? And then suddenly that turns into a little panic mode. Hey, did he touch it? What did he touch else? And stuff like. And what are you fearing for? Yes, we need to be careful, we need to be prepared, we need to take all the precautions, but then we also cannot stay in this state of paranoia, because you can't live your life thinking that way. You need to probably take it easy and this thing. But I'm going to get back to the point where you said, about being playful, being able to laugh at yourself, which kind of exposes your vulnerable side, like you, very strong and interesting difference in your case, because I've seen the kind of speaking, the kind of causes that you stand for. They're like really, really serious ones. They're just not just corporate stuff, but it's largely society, people, world impact. At the same time, like I've interacted with you on multiple occasions. I know the fun side of you as well. How important it is, you see, people might have conflicting issues here, where they say, hey, I stand for serious stuff, so I'm going to maintain this whole strict or I really expose the vulnerable side of mine, where they say, hey, I'm prone to make mistakes. I don't mind being laughed at, or I can make a joke on myself and stuff like that. How critical do you think this kind of attribute is important for somebody to really think creative and different? Because I feel it's very, very important. What do you think is that?
None of us knows everything about everything, right? So, I'm trying to make sense of big ideas. So I'm not a silo expert. I'm a across the board expert. So, I'm interested in practically everything, right? But the main thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring it together. So I can't possibly know when I can't possibly be right all the time, and I have no shame in admitting that, because I'm working really, really hard to understand some very, very complicated things, and I'm very willing to say, I don't understand this. Can you help me understand this? Because then I can be better at what I do and know more about what I do know. So, to me, being vulnerable it doesn't bother me at all, and I actually don't understand why people are so scared of it, because look, not everyone likes it. Some people are intimidated by it, some people are scared of it. They don't even actually understand their emotional reaction because it's not what they're capable of being. But to me, I've got nothing to hide. There's still loads of aspects of my life that are very private within the family or within my community and my closest friends, but I've really got nothing to hide. And when I think of what my role is today, the digital conversationalist is still a very big part of what I do from a professional perspective, but my goal really now is to be a voice that's here speaking up to have a better future for humanity and all life on earth. That's my goal. And if I get too serious about that, because don't get me, when I spend a lot of time digging into a lot of information about what's going on in the world from a climate perspective, and it's not pretty what we're facing in the future, and I worry for our children's future, and I want to do everything I can to make sure it's not as bad as what it could be if we do nothing, right? So I want to do that for all kids, but And there are days, weeks, sometimes months where I go into a really dark place because I'm taking on board a lot of information, and sometimes your hope just gets snapped out, and that happens a lot. What I've become good at is I can recognize it, accept it, and saying, okay, I've lost my hope reading this, And then I can say, put it to the side, let's keep moving forward, because you've got to keep your hope alive. As soon as you lose your hope, I mean, you're going to lose your joy, right? But I accept the emotions as they come, and I try and work my way through them as quickly as I can. You can't force it. So sometimes if it has to go for a long time, I accept that. But I'm pretty good at getting through. Like if I have a negative interaction with somebody and I'll be like, "Urgh," I'm pretty good at letting it go pretty quickly, like within moments, if not hours. And sometimes my husband gets a bit frustrated because he kind of says to me, when I stew on a moment for a few weeks, he kind of goes, "Good, you're normal now." But the reality is, I don't want to feel those feelings. I don't want to feel like that. No, it's not about the feelings. I don't want to feel like that towards people. You know, people, I don't think they're intentionally there to do harm. I don't, you know, if people don't like me, don't like what I do, don't like what I say, that's okay. You know, I can let them go. I don't have to hold on to that. That's what they do. I'm here. I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. You know, I've got very strong intentions, very strong purpose behind what I do. I really work hard at how I communicate, because I want to communicate in a way that brings people with me, not against me. But I'm never going to be 100% successful in that. So, yeah, I'm just trying to remember what your question was. Have I answered it?
Yeah. I was kind of talking more on the side of vulnerability. Yeah.
Now, vulnerability, I mean, don't be scared of it. You know, it's wonderful when you can be truly vulnerable, because people say you've got to be authentic today, right? If you want to succeed. And the only way you can be truly authentic is to be vulnerable. If you're not willing to be vulnerable, you can never be truly authentic. The two go together. So yeah, don't be embarrassed to be vulnerable. It's beautiful. There's nothing better than a vulnerable person. You know, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't frighten me, and I don't understand why it frightens people, either whether it's for themselves or seeing vulnerability in other people. I think we need more vulnerability in the world, because when we're more vulnerable, maybe we'll be in a more beautiful place to really sort of start to say, okay, what do we need to do to fix this? How do we get society back on track in a way that's more balanced, where human dignity sits at the centre of how we design the future? You know, and vulnerability is going to be a huge part of that. So go and listen to Brene Brown's vulnerability talks. I'm 100% behind what she says. I think it's just, don't be scared of it.
Yes, a big fan of Brené Brown. So it's like, no doubt, it's like 100% very true. And I'm sure you also take this back into your corporate side of things, you know, when you're doing, when you speak and work with organizations in terms of cultural change and cultural mindsets that you want to create. So one end is vulnerability. And I also feel vulnerability opens you up, and also it also leads to the fact of building a lot of trust within the groups and things like that. So how have you taken these elements of vulnerability, trust, and all that in your corporate side of things when you work with different organizations?
I mean, I've had some amazing experiences with corporate organizations, because I'm no different wherever I show up, right? I might swear less, that's the only difference. But I'm always the same, I'm always me. So when organizations want to work with me, I have really deep conversations with the person who potentially is going to be the buyer before we even begin, because if they're not aligned to who I am, if it's not going to work for them culturally to work with me, then there's no point us working together. I've had to say no to a couple of big corporations because I just didn't feel that they were ready for what I have to say, because when I run my social leadership training courses, I've had people crying in these classes because they've tapped into a part of their childhood that they'd forgotten about. Like one guy, he ended up writing this poem after this little meditation exercise we did, and he's a software engineer in Delhi actually, and brilliant guy, and he wrote this poem, and he said to me, I forgot that I could even do that. I used to love writing poetry, and then when I was 12, I just got focused on, you know, following the career path, and he sort of lost touch and disconnected with that past version of himself. And another guy's in tears because he had this visual in the meditation. He had this visual of this really powerful story, and so yeah, I'm all me all the time, and it's incredible what the relationships, especially when I do the training on social leadership, the relationships I build, because I have to go deep with these people. I have to go inside to who they are, and we talk about all these different aspects of their lives, and with the relationships with their parents, you name it, we talk about it. Because what I'm always trying to do is get back to what is that story that they have within them that needs to be unleashed, so they can go out there and be a powerful voice on social media. So it's every time I walk away from one of these sessions, I feel like I'm the most privileged person on the planet to be able to get to do what I do, and I love it. I enjoy it, and every now and again someone will be like, oh, I don't want to be doing that. I don't want to be getting too personal. But over time, even if they start being a social leader from a logical brain sort of space, over time I watch they become more and more and more personal as they get more and more rewards by engaging in a meaningful way. So, it's cool. I think, from a career perspective, don't change who you are to fit into some idea of the corporate culture that you're part of. Turn up as yourself. If you don't fit in, go and find another job. It's okay, but always show up as yourself and anchor deeply in your values, and never get thrown off and think that you have to be something that you're not, because from the minute you do that, that's the minute you get lost, and it's the minute you start to disconnect from who you truly are. And I think a lot of work that a lot of people are doing at the moment is reminding people how to get back to who they were in the first place. So you can do that in corporate world, you can do it in your personal world, but you can definitely do it in a corporate world.
Wonderful. So resonates with me. I too completely believe what you say this, because I've always tried. The only pluses that I always look forward to and saying, hey, you know what, you try and do what you feel like doing, and then there's not a single day that you feel you ever worked. I feel my blessing that way is I always feel, though I've been on the corporate side, I've been on this side, but always I've done what I feel like. So I always feel, hey, you know what, I have no regrets in terms of whatever failures and success that I've got, but then I've done it what I feel like doing. So, and that keeps you happy, and that brings down to another aspect of thinking, for to have all these happen, to really exist in today's world, how much of collaborative mindset or how much of collaboration do you see as extremely critical for us to make this world a more creative, better place?
There is we are in a phase where we're breaking up into different little nationalities, and we're protecting our borders, and it's the flags are going up and the marches are happening and all that stuff that's happened all throughout history. And the reality is we've been in the middle of a global crisis since the beginning of last year, and the lack of cooperation, well, we're seeing how it's playing out right now, right? But the next big crisis is the global climate crisis. National borders don't matter. When you look at the predictions for the future, the vast majority of the Earth's population will have to move into a couple of small little pockets where it'll still be livable for humans if we don't get it under control. So, the whole idea of national borders to me, nationalism just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm Australian, but I'm a citizen of the world. I don't care where people come from. I don't care what skin colour people have got. I just care what's in their heart, And we are so in a time where we need to come together, and we need to respect each other. We need to get rid of some of the old ideas and the old thinking that haven't served us, and they've gotten us to this point where we're basically about to make the planet unlivable for ourselves, which is crazy, that old Chinese proverb about, when you knock down all the trees, you can't eat money. It's, it's not too far away, right? And so we're just at a point where we just need to, we need to take the ego out of the way the world is run. We've seen some shocking examples of it in the last few years. And it's representative. It's not the leaders that are the problem. It's representative within our communities that those leaders even get into power. But it's time to come together. It's time for all of us to come together. We've just got to work together. We've got to love each other. We've got to remember that. And we can't make this if we don't do it together. We just can't. We can't. And we never have been able to. And the people who don't communicate that message, they're the problem. They really are the problem. Anyone who wants to put up walls and divides us is a problem. So let's put them to the side, bring the people that get the message together, and let's go out there and create this future so that our children are not going to have a terrible, terrible future, which is what will happen if we don't do anything. We have to come together. It's beyond time. We're so overdue action that the action that we need to take now is going to be very drastic. We're all going to have to sacrifice, and I've already mourned what I'm going to have to lose. I've already done that, and I think it's a really healthy thing to do it before it happens, but we can't keep growing the way we're growing. We can't keep flying, consuming, ripping up the things that matter. We can't keep, taking stocks out of the ocean. We just can't keep doing it. And we know that. People know that. It's time for us to come together and to work out how do we build anew and secure our future in some level. We can't, it's not going to be, we're not going to have a future without harm. We've already gone too far, but how can it be not as bad? Like, the refugee crisis to me is a classic example. We know, so 50% of the refugees right now are children, right? It's shocking. But we know that millions, possibly billions of refugees will be coming. Why aren't we preparing for that? So that at least there's a possibility of some dignity in the future for the refugees who will be forced to move because of the climate crisis. Can we do that? Can we? I think we can.
That's an interesting perspective in terms of how things might turn out. And yes, of course, it's a big time to make that change because we are at the cusp of a whole lot of action that's and you don't know what's going to hit you next. And it brings me also to a very interesting analogy that I want to bring across through our conversation too, is like where I feel like the kind of different aspects and qualities that we were talking, in terms of being playing or having the sense of trust, collaboration, all that. And I feel these are all what is very critical for somebody to be creative. Mm-hmm. And why creative? Because only when that person is creative, he's going to come out of his whole machine robotic process and start thinking very differently. And once he starts thinking very differently, he's going to look forward to create a happy place. So I have this whole theory of saying creative people are happy people. There could be multiple debates where people could come out and say, but then I say creative in the sense not really the artistic kind and stuff like that, where I differ that from, keep aside that. But I'm saying in general, if you're very creative, you are happy. And once you are the happiness is what we all long for. No matter whatever amount of money or whatever we get, that's what we all ultimately want to achieve. We might have different parameters set to what defines that happiness. So I feel creative people can be the only people who can turn the world into a happy place. What is your thought on that?
Such an interesting idea. My dad's an artist, right? So I grew up with a full-time professional artist father, and we weren't very wealthy because he wasn't very good at the business side of selling his art. So that actually created a lot of stress on the family, right? But then when you think about creativity from a much, much bigger perspective, which is I love that you've done that. So I come from creative upbringing, and so music, but also the sort of books that we read. So I was a big fantasy reader from a young age, but also creative in the way it's just about not following the path, right? The sort of sports. I was a bodybuilder as a teenager. I mean, in the 80s, there weren't that many females doing bodybuilding at that time, right? So it's also about being creative in doing different things and being open to different opportunities and not following the path. So I definitely think that is definitely a path to happiness. Is happiness the right word? So to me, it's more contentment than happiness, because we seem to be in a world where there's this sort of idea around happiness where it's almost forced on people. We should be happy. Well, you can't be happy all the time, and but at the same time, we're not acknowledging that negative emotions. We're not allowed to feel them because we're supposed to be happy, right? So, but going back to what we've been talking about right from the beginning, I believe being creative in acquiring your knowledge is a really, really important thing. And that's why I look at all the different angles. And I see that as a form of creativity, understanding different viewpoints and sort of trying to work out, trying to put all the pieces together and sort of sit more in the middle and being less judgmental and less, you don't want to take a side. As soon as you start taking sides, that's when I think we all start to get a bit stuck and it makes you more unhappy. So if you could try not to be sitting on a side where you're right and everybody else is wrong, I think definitely, and that's with massive curiosity. Never stop learning, never stop asking questions, never think you've got all the answers, and always be open to other points of view and try and engage in dialogue with people that you disagree with in a way that's productive, that you can both maybe move a little bit forward, closer to each other. So to me, that's a form of creativity. I don't know if you agree. Creativity. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the essence of what you're saying is creative people are going to be naturally happier because they're not stuck. They're expressing their true self. They're not following a path that somebody told them they should be following, right? So I think it's more, to me, that's what you've just said sort of means. Does that make sense?
I feel, in fact, that's part of my talks as well, because where I go talk to schools or colleges or even in organizations, I push them in terms of thinking, try and build that creative side without an outcome or without a desired result. Not being judgmental, and you kind of summed it up very well. It's like probably all those biases is what helps us not seeing those different dots around you. And you gave that wonderful example. You read different information from all, and these are like little dots, and how you connect those dots and interpret can give you a whole new meaning, and it's really purposeful in terms of what we all do. On that note, I would also want to come down to very more of a summing up thing for you. Like, where do you see yourself or the world that you are in going forward in the next few years or in the next few years to come?
Oh, it's such a good question. So I have this belief, and this might surprise people, but I detach from the outcome, right? So I'm about to publish this new book. People who don't know me very well might be surprised by it, because it's like a case study of my life and the journey of my life, and it's an invitation to other people to go on their own journey across their life and sort of work out where maybe they kind of stumbled, where somebody else's ideas maybe infiltrated their life and maybe put them on a different path, and it didn't allow them to, they didn't have the confidence at the time to go on their own path, and this other person sort of came in and said, oh, you should do that, so they did that. And then they kind of followed this path, and they weren't particularly happy on that path. So it's kind of reminding them that saying, okay, so you got off the path, that's all right. Now let's get back onto it and, trust your own counsel. So it's really looking in at the ideas that we have within us and saying, what's mine? Who am I? Like what's being put in here by other people? And do I accept it? Is it mine? Do I need to get rid of it, right? So I spent a lot of time in my life getting rid of, sort of shedding other people's ideas about what I should do with my life. And I actually have no idea how this book is going to be received. I'll have to send you a copy. It's funny, quirky, serious. I talk about all of the emotions, negative, positive emotions. And I don't know where that book's going to take me. And somebody was giving me some ideas recently about what I should do, sort of set up some workshops and do some stuff. And I said, no, I think I need to wait for that book to be out. And then if people need more, because sometimes you need a book, you read a book and you need more. But other times you can read a book and it does the job. And I don't know if the book does the job yet of sort of getting the message across that I'm trying to get across. And if the book can do the job, then I don't need to offer more, right? So I'll let it take me where it goes. So I detach from the outcome. So when I look at the next few years, I'm hopefully going to get my two boys through school. One of them's had a really rough time he had a hearing challenge from when he was young. So I just want to get him through school, and obviously into adulthood without maiming themselves significantly, because they are boys and their brains develop slower, right? And yeah, just smile. I just want to smile. I want to enjoy life with my husband. I'd love to spend the rest of my life on the road, just traveling and meeting people and doing interviews and showing people how beautiful the world is. That would be probably the one thing that I would love to eventually do at some point. But yeah, I'm just here for the ride. I'm very purposeful in what I do and the actions that I'm taking. But I don't like to have an idea, because I think when you put like a destination on an ambition, your imagination isn't as big as the possibilities that could be open to you. So keep your mind open.
Wow, that kind of wonderfully kind of sums up for our talk in terms of don't put a destination. It's like enjoy the journey. It's like it's kind of said in most of the places, it's not about the journey from A to B, but it's the journey that we have in between the destination that's going to make it interesting. Andrea, so thankful for this wonderful time and the lovely conversation that we had on a whole host of things, and I'm sure this is going to leave a lot of people inspired when they listen to this talk.
I love what you do. I love your work. If you're not following Harish, follow him. He's a brilliant guy. Yeah, really happy to be here, and just remember what's important, and I think if you're rushing so much and life's just frantic and it's about buying the next, the biggest, the whatever, then just take a step back. And joy and contentment is possible in all of our lives, but I think we've got to get off this track that we've created, this idea of success, because if there's no joy, if there's no peace, then I don't know. I think we can do better, and I think we can all do better and live better lives, and more in tune with Earth as well. So that's my goal.
Wonderful.